Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be speaking to an entrepreneur and one of the wealthiest men in South Africa, Mr. Rob Hersov. On episode 1, we'll be discussing his philosophy, his business ways, and of course, how South Africa can evolve in the modern economy. That'll be tonight, right here on Hilaal TV on Talking Point. Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of A Talking Point. My name is Farhaaz Patel. We are coming to you from our studios here at Hilaal TV, channel 347 here in Johannesburg. Now, today's episode, and it's not just going to be for today, it's going to be for next week also. We are going to be talking to a man, a billionaire, an entrepreneur, a man who has various business portfolios, and we are glad to have him. We are grateful to have him, and he's going to share his insights, not only from a business perspective, but of course, politically, what is happening in the country. So for the next 2 episodes, our guest will be Mr. Rob Hersov. Rob, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us and making the time for us.
Farhaaz, what a great honor to be on Hilaal TV. It really is. Wonderful. Thank you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. So, Mr. Hersov, a lot of, Rob, as you asked me to call you, a lot of people have seen you, of course, on social media, on various other media platforms, talking about, obviously, the current situation in South Africa. But we are going to talk about that in the next episode. I want to touch on, of course, who is Mr. Rob Hersov, and of course, the wealth that you've obtained. But I want to talk not just about the wealth, I want to talk about the various business portfolios that you run through Africa Invest and so many others.
Thank you. Happy to do so.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Mr. Rob.
So I grew up in South Africa, born in Johannesburg, grew up in South Africa, educated here, University of Cape Town military service. And then in 1985, I left the country to see the world. And I ended up at Goldman Sachs in New York, then Harvard Business School. Then I worked for Rupert Murdoch as his right-hand man. And then I joined Johan Rupert and Richemont in Europe to help them build pay television business across Europe. I then became an entrepreneur and have done various businesses. Some have succeeded, some have failed. And I came back to South Africa 6.5 years ago. But briefly, I said, South Africa's finished under Zuma. It's doomed. It'll have economic collapse and it'll fall apart. And my wife and I came back to sort of see the last few years of an incredible country. And then Cyril Ramaphosa got elected. My wife said, what does that mean? I said, well, it's just kicking the can down the road. The ANC is a disaster and it's going to destroy the country. But we've probably bought ourselves a few more years. But I've decided to stay. I've decided to commit my life to saving this country from the ANC, from the EFF, and do everything I can to do so. But on the business side, I have numerous businesses based out of London and in America, and I've invested in South Africa. And it's a broad range of businesses, from finance, mining, technology, to aviation. Often areas that most people are too scared to invest in. And then my next area is gas to power, which we can talk about. So it's a broad spread of businesses.
Rob, talk to us about, obviously, going overseas. You see, going to Europe, going to America, they're, of course, developed economies. What do you learn from there, and bring it to South Africa? Because, there are obviously continents where you can use that as a perfect blueprint to learn how the business world is and bring that expertise into South Africa.
Very good question. What you learn by going to mainly the Western democracies is that government's role is to create a framework for investment, regulation that supports investment and protects minorities, protects the people who need to be protected. But that's it. And in those countries, governments are trying to promote inward investment into their countries. And that's what you learn, is how a government should operate to allow investment, allow business to operate. In this country, the biggest impediment to investment and growth and building a business is government. And government is competing for the country's resources and getting in the way of business. So, we need to fix things. But having lived in the US, lived in Britain, lived in Italy, lived in Holland, and traveled to many, many countries, you see the countries that work and you see the countries that don't work. And it's pretty obvious what you have to do to have a successful country. It's very obvious. And the first is not to believe in socialism or communism.
Rob, a lot of the, when we look at countries, and I'm going to look at, of course, countries that have a lot of the communist ways to them, nationalizing many of the key points. I just want to get your take on it. How do you strike the balance of having something nationalized, but also at the same time keeping it as a profit and for it to work? We see, of course, in South Africa, the push for there to be the nationalizing, of course, of the South African Reserve Bank. So what are the pros and cons of nationalizing, but also at the same time making sure that there's a profit to keep it sustainable?
That's the right way to ask the question. Well done, you nailed it. The ANC want to nationalize everything so they can steal. It's that simple. They break so they can steal. They break democracy so democracy doesn't work so they can steal. I'll give you a very good example of how to do things right. And a government should really only get involved in an industry when the local or international investors can't actually get it done. That's the only time they should get involved, okay? Take Ethiopian Airlines. Huge success. Ethiopian Airlines is owned by the government of Ethiopia and by the people of Ethiopia, but it's run as a private company. It's brilliant. So what Ethiopia did at the beginning is they said, right, we need a national airline. We're well situated to be a hub. We can compete with Dubai, London, Frankfurt, Johannesburg, and let's hire the best management team in the world, most of whom came from America, but they have an Ethiopian now as running it. And they said, put a business plan together where we, the government, fund the initial business. You build the business, and then all your profits are used to reinvest in the business. And we have no involvement. We stay hands off. You make the right commercial decisions. And that has been a huge success. That's the only model that works where a government should be involved. Anything else is just an opportunity for corruption and stealing. So if you set a business up, if the government sets a business up, they should bring in business people, commercial managers, and on the board, and allow them to build the business successfully and reinvest profits in the business. So no dividends go out. That's the only way. But the South African government have no idea how to do that because their intention is purely to steal.
Well, we'll be getting more business lessons from Mr. Rob Hersov after the break. Do stay tuned. The conversation will continue. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Mr. Rob Hersov. This is the first of 2 episodes we have with him. Rob, I want to talk about your business portfolios. There's one that actually caught my eye. It's building a lot of momentum in South Africa, and that is the game of paddle. Just talk to us about your involvement in it, because it's huge, isn't it, here in South Africa?
So we launched our first paddle court in May 2021 as Africa Paddle. And this was 8 investors, 4 South Africans, of which I was one, and 4 Swedes. And it's been a huge success in Europe, in Spain and Sweden. It's exploded as the most popular sport, overtaking tennis. And we thought the same must be true. South Africa is a sporty country. So we opened our first courts in Camps Bay in May 2021. And we now have 10 clubs and 40 courts. So, we've in very prominent positions in Cape Town, Johannesburg, rolling it out in KZN, near Durban, Plet. We're going to Bloemfontein, Nelspruit, Pretoria very soon, Stellenbosch actually in the next 2 months. We are the biggest paddle company in South Africa at the moment, and we are expanding rapidly. We expect to have 120 to 150 courts by mid-2024. We're already profitable, and it's a fantastic sport. It's actually addictive. People take one lesson. It's very easy to learn. You serve underarm, and all of a sudden they're playing every second day. I hope you've tried it.
Yeah, well, I have tried it once, and I tell you what, it's actually very, very addictive. Need to get the hang of it, though, because it's not like tennis where, obviously you're playing for tiebreakers or serves. This is very, 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 very different, but really addictive, as you would say. The future of it, though, can we see it being professionalized? Because, obviously, an event like the Olympics, welcomes so much of sport. They do have tennis. Do you think something like a paddle can maybe get into the Olympics, or we could have maybe a world championship of some sort?
Yes, it's already in the pipeline. I think the rules are you have to have a certain number of countries playing the sport at a significant level. And I do think padel is already there. So we might even be in the next Olympics. But if there's a seniors category, I want to compete because I'm now 62.
Well, listen, at the Olympics, age is nothing but a number. We see anyone from 15, even right up until, in the 60s competing at the games. Rob, I want to talk about, obviously, COVID-19 and when it obviously began in 2020, various businesses, of course, suffered. And we're talking from aviation to the hospitality industry. As an entrepreneur, as a businessman, how difficult was it to navigate through these difficult moments? And of course, we are back to normality, but just looking at 2020 right up until now, from a businessman who's got so many years of experience navigating through those difficult moments.
So the businesses that survived were the ones that pivoted very quickly. And, South Africa, it hasn't just been COVID. We have load shedding. It's very hard for businesses to stay above water and survive. But we are resilient people, as you know. We're survivors. So for COVID, a good example is Invest Africa. I founded Invest Africa 12 years ago, and it's a business for sensibly evangelizing investments in Africa. So we profile extraordinary people, business people, politicians, athletes, authors, and try and help international investors understand Africa and see which countries they would like to invest in, which sectors, and which ones to avoid. And Invest Africa's main offering was lunches and dinners with speakers and also VIP delegations into Africa. And both of those were knocked dead by COVID. So we had a crisis on our hands. The fact we survived was mainly down to our great CEO, Karen Taylor in London, and the team. But she pivoted the business very quickly. She said, look, I don't know how long this is going to last, but we've got to get onto Zoom, we've got to get digital, and we've got to get online. And we've got to offer our members more than they were getting in the analog world, because we're going to have to bridge the gap till we can actually see people in the flesh again. And she did a very good job. We survived. We had our sponsors stay with us, our members stay with us. It was quite incredible. So, chapeau to her.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the digital economy versus obviously the traditional one towards the end of this episode. Rob, you mentioned something important. So obviously anyone can bring a business idea through. Through Invest Africa, how do you obviously go ahead and profile that person so that there can be investment into their business? And we're talking, of course, mainly small and medium enterprises. So, how do they get their funding to convince, investors outside of the continent that this is a business worth investing in?
So in Africa, there are some incredible entrepreneurs. There's incredible human capital. It's no different to anywhere else. Africa has tons and tons of smart people across the continent and with incredible ideas. And often the ideas that come out of Africa are fit for purpose, because in many parts, Africa is a mix of third, second, and first world within one country. And in the urban areas, you have a first world economy. And in the rural areas, it's subsistence farming or alluvial mining. So often African solutions are very, very smart and cover all three of those economies at once, and therefore can go to other economies like Mexico and Turkey and India. But the challenge then is to raise money. And there is actually quite a lot of money available for good ideas, but they have to be married with good management. And in many cases, the management hasn't got a track record. So it's usually a young African out of university or out of school that's got a real skill, a real idea, and just finding that seed capital is tricky. Once they have it, they can scale the business. And there've been some, I think there were 8 unicorns that came out of Africa last year, and I think there'll be 12 this year. I helped raise a fund, Norshen 22, $180 million fund for investing in technology in Africa. And we hired an extraordinary woman in Joburg, an extraordinary woman in Lagos, an extraordinary guy in Nairobi to run the fund. And our partners are mainly Swedish unicorns, Swedish entrepreneurs, plus institutions. And that money is available, and we're investing in growth capital. So it's not seed capital, it's growth capital, which is Series A, Series B, Series C. And the checks are kind of $2 to $5 million US. And we're looking for good opportunities. We've invested in 3 businesses, but we're seeing really, really great businesses coming out of Africa. I mean, I'm so proud to be an African and to see what we can do. Scaling internationally is a little harder because you're competing with international companies, but it's not impossible. Calendly? Calendly is founded by a Nigerian living in America. It's $1 billion business. I hear about these. Encino, which is a cloud-based banking business, listed in NASDAQ for $7 billion US, founded by an entrepreneur from South Africa, Worcester, who lives in America now. So it's not just out of Africa, it's Africans abroad doing extraordinary things. Makes me very proud.
Yeah, and I think, you've hit the nail on the head there, Rob, about what us as Africans can do outside of outside of the continent. I mean, it's massive, and it's obviously we see it in the entertainment industry, but we also see it with regards to them from a business perspective. Rob, I want to ask this question about obviously tertiary education, and I think the trajectory, is that once you're done with school, you need to go to university and obviously get whatever qualification you can, and then go into the working world. But if you have a business idea without the tertiary education, and of course approaching, investors like yourself and outside of the continent, can there still be something that can work with it, or is tertiary education, in your opinion, still something that is key to helping you grow your business?
So entrepreneurialism as an opportunity, as a job, as a vocation, has gone in leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. So to be an entrepreneur 20 years ago was way riskier. There was less capital, less ability to actually, make it a success. And if you didn't go to university 20, 30 years ago and you went straight into an entrepreneur, all the doors were closed to joining any of the big corporates or institutions. So you were really laying your career on the line by avoiding tertiary education, getting straight into a business. You had to succeed.
Yes.
These days, there are TED Talks, there are, TV shows, there is, your great Hilaal TV that profiles entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are seen as incredible, dynamic young people, and there's a lot of support, financial and other, and mentoring for being an entrepreneur. So today there's less urgency to go to get tertiary education. If you've got a great idea, you're hardworking, and you can pull a good team together. This is key. In the areas where you don't have the strength, finance maybe, sales maybe, operations or technology, got to hire the best people available, even if they're better than you. That's crucial, because an investor will look for the people around you. And I've always tried to hire people better than myself, because they take the load off you and lift the business. So tertiary education is less important. And I'd even be as cheeky to say, you're probably wasting your time if you're doing a BA political science. We don't need more political scientists. So, if you need 4 years to mature yourself, well, fine, go and do BA political science, but don't be a political scientist. But if you're doing medicine, law, engineering, computer science, or business science, those are phenomenal degrees. Or accounting, those are tough, real degrees. But I'm not a big fan of any BAs with media studies or gender studies, complete waste of time in my view. I'd rather get into business.
Before we end this segment, Rob, how important, you speak about those degrees that that would contribute towards South African economy and African economy. Agriculture is one of them. How important is an agricultural degree? Because, I mean, food security across, not just here in South Africa, across the world, it's something that we need to really value and hold dear to us. So how important is, being a farmer who can help contribute, making sure that food security is here in South Africa?
Hugely important. So agri-tech and agribusiness is a very important degree. And I'm sorry I missed that, but you picked it up very well. But the world produces way more food than the 8 billion people need. A lot of it just gets lost. It doesn't get to market in time. Load shedding forces farmers to have to destroy their crops. The ANC destroying our agriculture. And the ANC forcing expropriation without compensation as a forum scares people away from investing in agriculture. It's moronic. But agribusiness is fundamental. But just as fundamental is learning about logistics, getting the food to market, because that's where a big gap in food security lies. And the Middle East countries have identified correctly and intelligently food security as an important element. And they're investing not just in agribusiness, but in routes to market. So trucking, logistics, ports, aviation, they've really nailed it, including Saudi Arabia, which has, no real worries. They just see it as a very smart thing to do, and I applaud them for that.
After the break, we'll be continuing the conversation with Mr. Rob Hersov. We'll be talking his relationship with other wealthy businessmen in South Africa and, of course, how they're able to do business together. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. This is the first episode out of 2 with our conversation with entrepreneur and businessman, Mr. Rob Hersov. Rob, let's talk about the relationship you have, of course, with other businessmen in South Africa. We know you've, of course, done business with the likes of Mr. Johan Rupert, Mr. Nicky Oppenheimer, and other wealthy South Africans. Now, let's talk about, the way you did the business with them, and of course, learning from them and understanding the way they do their business. Of course, Mr. Rupert's got investment in different companies, maybe to yours, and Mr. Oppenheimer's got different companies to yours. But when you sit around businessmen like that, I mean, what is it that you learn from them that, of course, makes you become a better businessman and entrepreneur?
There are many things. And often you learn different things from different people. But the 3 most influential business people in my life are my father, Rupert Murdoch, and Johan Rupert. 3 extraordinary human beings. And I think what I've learned from all of them is, firstly, compassion. Everyone in your business is important, not just your senior executives. The person at the door, the person that serves your tea, the person that drives your car, the mine workers, they are earning their salary by working in your business, and they deserve respect. But not just respect on a salary point of view. If you can greet them by name, spend a little bit of time as you run into people day to day. Rupert Murdoch was extraordinary. He talked to the guy driving his car, he talked to the doorman opening the door at a hotel, and he was genuinely interested. What newspapers do you read? What are you doing these days? What worries you about global affairs? But he really, really listened to the answer and be interested. And, he and Johan Rupert, extraordinary human beings, extraordinary businessmen, and very good people. And I know Rupert Murdoch is pilloried as a sort of flag bearer of republicanism and of conservatism in the UK and the right. But he really is a libertarian, an open-minded, decent, smart, super smart guy. And what I really learned from both of them is decisiveness. You never have enough information to make a decision in business. You have some information, and then you've got to really choose your route, be decisive, and lead. And if it is the wrong direction, be ready to do a U-turn or a pivot. But momentum is everything. And the worst leaders are the ones that just don't have an answer and sit there hoping someone else will answer the question. Organizations fall apart. Got to be decisive, even if you're not 100% sure that's the right direction. And I've learned a lot. I learned a lot from all 3. They're very big shoes to fill, those 3.
Yeah, and I mean, one of them, of course, you mentioned Mr. Rupert Murdoch. I mean, he built the media empire, Sky, obviously being one of them, taking it into Fox. Just the way he was able to build media as a business, because he was probably one of the first to make media the private venture and of course take it globally. And I mean, that is something inspiring, is it? You know, especially for myself, a media practitioner like myself, looking at the way Rupert Murdoch made it into a business, it's something worth looking at, isn't it, Mr. Rob?
Yeah. You know, Rupert Murdoch, I mean, I helped write some of his speeches, so I got to really understand him. What a man. And as a little boy, he used to watch his father, who owned a small media business in Australia, a newspaper business, you know, checking the titles, checking the grammar, checking the thing before it got published, the detail. And, you know, Rupert always has newspaper ink in his veins, even though he's in digital media and television. But he saw the future. He was the first foreigner to invest in media in the UK. And he went in and bought The Sun. He said, here's a publication no one takes seriously, but I can massively build out the readership. I can't compete at the Telegraph and Times level yet, but here's The Sun. No one's thinking about the man or woman in the street. I can build that out. He was the first in America to identify multi-channel satellite television. I worked on the first ever business plan for what became Sky TV in America. It was a combination of NBC, Cablevision, Hughes and us, and us being News Corp. And he saw that. He saw that, you know, you can't just have 3 television channels, NBC, ABC, and CBS. There's going to be multi-channel television. And in 1989, I was working on the cat and dog channel and the racing car channel, these crazy concepts that all exist now, especially on the internet. So he's a real visionary and prepared to take the risk, prepared to commit the capital, and prepared to go for it. What a man. He also is able to sell at the right time. You know, he does see when competition is going to be enormous, and he's able to sell out at the right time, which he's done with Fox. You know, 20th Century Fox and others. He's a genius.
Rob, you mentioned about obviously the workers and their importance, and morale is one of that, because, you know, if you can keep the workers' morale high, you know, that is important for your business. And all of the portfolios that you are involved in, of course, you've got numerous amounts of employees. How important is it to make sure that morale is important, to keep those employees motivated to make the business a success? Because once the business is a success, obviously it transcends into the employees.
So true. When I was at Harvard Business School, I went to a speech by Jack Welch. Jack Welch was the sort of greatest corporate CEO of the time, ran General Electric when it was dominating America. And he said, you get the union you deserve. So if you get a monstrously bad union, you're probably doing something wrong, okay, as a CEO, as an employee. Now, it doesn't often apply in this country because unions are weaponized by the communists, you know, to be anti-business. So let's just take the rest of the world. There's some industries that aren't unionized. And the reason they aren't unionized is because actually people are doing the business people are doing the right thing for the stakeholders and all stakeholders, including employees. When people say we need a union, you know something's not going right. They need representation. But if they're happy, if they've been looked after well by management, they won't want to unionize.
Rob, you deal with a lot of board of directors in many of the businesses that you are involved in. And, you know, one thing I learned, obviously, in business economics in school is that you need to make sure that you have the board of directors on your side, whatever vision it is. As somebody who has chaired many businesses, how important is it that your board of directors are on your side to make sure that the business moves in the same direction as all of you?
So I learned a lot from Johan Rupert and Rupert Murdoch on that. Both of them run their businesses and they effectively are the control shareholders. But both of them spend a lot of time with all of their directors, keeping them informed, keeping them aligned, keeping them with the vision of the company. And it's crucial. You know, you do get rogue directors that cause trouble for outside reasons. And I've had a few of those lately. But even with them, you've got to go and sit face to face and say, look, why are you doing this? What's your agenda? And how can we at least work together or find a middle ground? the role of the non-executive independent director is to protect outside shareholders that have no voice. And then it's obviously more important in public companies than in private companies. But private companies, it's important too. Minority shareholders need representation, need to be looked after. I know many of these things are covered by shareholders' agreements, but those have to be enforced, And it's unfair for a majority shareholder to abuse the rights of a minority shareholder. It's just wrong, and that's where directors come in. And it's better to have good directors, independent directors, who really know what they're doing and are strong, than to have, those dogs in the back of the car that nod their heads, the models. Those are not good directors.
Rob, before we go to the break, I want to talk about trading on the stock exchange and the risk and the rewards of it. Of course, we see so many companies in South Africa who have, not just got their shares in the JSE, but of course at Wall Street, NASDAQ, and so many others. One of your inspirations and mentors, of course, Mr. Johan Rupert, Remgro and Richemont, they trade outside of South Africa. We see Naspers being one of them. Of course, they trade in the Chinese stock exchange, among so many others. The risk and reward of trading in stock exchanges, if any business wants to get into to trade, obviously publicly, what would your advice be to them?
So I've been particularly unsuccessful as an investor in the public markets. I just tend to lose money and not make money. And, I get persuaded by someone, this is a great business area, lithium or cobalt, it's going to be the future of electric vehicles. Here's the right companies to invest in. But what happens is I'll put money in and then not look at the shares. And then a year later, I'll have a look and they're half the price. And the guys who follow them day to day have got out at the top. The guys who don't follow them ride them up and ride them down. So I tend not to invest. I actually don't have a single share other than my SPAC that is listed. And that's a different animal. I don't actually own any public market shares right now. None, zero. I'm a venture capital, growth capital investor, private equity type investor. I'm just terrible at public markets, so I'm not the right guy to ask.
Okay, well, Rob, we will continue the conversation after break. We'll be wrapping up the first episode, the last segment of the first episode. We'll be talking the digital economy versus the traditional one. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. We're in our final segment for our first episode with entrepreneur businessman, Mr. Rob Hersov. Rob, you spoke about earlier on the digital economy, and of course, it's gaining traction where one can just take a phone and they can tap or do a transfer anywhere. You were there during the high days of the traditional economy. You're still around with the digital economy. What are the pros and cons? Because obviously, with the digital economy, it opens up avenues for great innovations, but also for there to be, the typical white-collar crime that could happen. So how do you navigate it in your businesses using the digital economy?
So I'm a big believer that everything will be in the digital economy or everything will be digitally enabled, but everything, agriculture and mining included. So for young people, really get to understand technology developments, chat GPT, crypto, blockchain. These things, I know they're going through dips and people are worried, are they for real? They're for real. It's going to improve our lives immeasurably. And obviously there's the risk of criminals gaming the system, but 99% of people on this planet are good people and want the same thing. They want better lives for themselves and for their children. And the digital world's going to give that. It really is. And a huge wealth will be created and liberty will be extended to more and more people around the world, freedom and liberty. So I'm the biggest believer of all. I think these digital changes are just positive with almost no negatives. But when you look at the sort of digital world, you really have to think of each individual product and service and how it can be done more easily and offered to more people at a lower price. Many things you pay for, you can get for free. You can do all your work and research on the internet through Google. And then now, Chat GPT, you can actually get, the digital world to write your essays.
Yes.
It's definitely worth looking into that technology. It's so exciting. So I'm a big believer. I'm 100% thumbs up for the digital world.
And
the other thing is politically, when you have dictators or bad leaders, they will get taken down by the young people who are connected on WhatsApp and social media and digital economy. So increasingly, bad government will be replaced by good governance through blockchain, DAOs, and people being interconnected. So watch out, bad governments.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be our discussion, of course, for that second episode. Rob, you talk about crypto. I mean, everyone's talking about crypto and, trading online and all of that has now come into the frame. And of course, COVID-19 had, of course, pushed it to even become a global phenomenon. Your take on crypto, I mean, it's interesting just the way it's being done, but do you think that many small and medium business enterprises need to look at crypto as a great way of, putting out their investment and, of course, marketing their business?
Absolutely. The world is heading in that direction. Road bumps or not, we will eventually get rid of central banks and treasuries and governments controlling currencies, and it will become, individually based. It'll be based on the blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum smart contracts on the blockchain is the future. Everything's going to be on the blockchain, but everything in the future. So get used to it is my view. I haven't invested in crypto myself. I mean, I have an Ethereum in a wallet, but that's because I had to, because we're building a business that's going to launch Web 3.0, open world. I'll tell you about that one day. It's going to launch quite soon. But, crypto's for real, without a doubt. People should learn what it's all about and understand it.
Rob, one final question to end this episode. Last year, I had former Shoprite and Pepco chair, Mr. Christo Visa. He spoke to me about just how he built his business. And he says it starts with the small seed and it grows and it becomes big. And when it becomes big, that's when you realize just how much of an impact you have made within the economy and, of course, within communities. For your advice to anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur, who wants to start a business, who wants to contribute to the economy, what would your advice be to them?
So the first thing is, be ready to commit your life in the next few years, and I mean 24/7. Make sure your wife, husband, family know that this is a full 100% commitment. Hire the best people you can. I can't stress that enough. I would rather back a great management team than a great concept, because a great concept with a bad management team will fail. A great management team with a bad concept will pivot, and they're going to find their way through to success. And I've done that on a few occasions, backed fantastic people, and they've pivoted and the business has been a success. And then other times I've backed a great idea and the management team have messed it up. So that's my strongest commitment. And life is about continually learning. Never sit back on your laurels. Sometimes people make a lot of money very quickly and they confuse luck with genius. I think if I'd sold Sporthall for 400 million pounds, I've got it across the line, would I be where I am today? Probably not. I might have then blown it on some crazy idea thinking I was a genius. That's why I still work.
Rob, I'd like to say thank you. Of course, next week we continue the conversation, but we're going to be going into the political side of things. And of course, just your take on what is happening right now, because we've seen that in a couple of weeks that have passed, your contribution to wanting to make South Africa a better place. This episode, of course, was discussing business. Next week, we discuss politics. From myself, Farhaaz Patel, and the rest of the team, our episode 2 with Mr. Rob Hersov will continue next week, Wednesday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.